Hello BookTube. We are now 3 full months into the year, so I thought I would sit down today and fill you in on everything that I've been reading and loving over the first quarter of 2026, and also give you a little bit of an update about my kind of self-imposed book buying rules for 2026 and whether I've been able to stick to those. We're going to briefly touch on the amount that I've been reading and some highlights and lowlights, as well as talking about films a little bit as well. I've been really trying to get into watching more films again in 2026, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you about every single book that I read in quarter one. I read 31 books total, so we'd be here for a very, very long time if I told you about all of those, plus all of the movies that I've been watching as well. So this is just going to be a snapshot, some stats and a general overview of what I've been reading, what I've been watching, what I've been buying, etc, etc. The cat is here. So as I said, I've read 31 books total in quarter one in January, February and March of 2026. This is quite a high number for me. My normal reading speed is like maybe 8 or so books a month, but in January I ended up reading 15 books. I don't normally read this much in any given month, but this was a very romance heavy month for me. It was the only thing I really had the headspace for in January. All I could really do was watch horror movies and read romance novels. I don't know, that's my comfort media, I guess. I think Heated Rivalry probably had something to do with that. I was really in the mood for romance, and I was also trying to expand on a list of recommendations for romance books to bring to you, and so that formed a large part of my reading in January. In February, my reading was much more my usual speed. I read 8 books in the month of February, and then the same again, 8 books in the month of March. This is my much more typical reading speed. I maybe read between 7 and 10 books in a month, depending on the length of them, whether I've got other big things going on outside of my hobbies. So it really depends what I'm up to and how I'm consuming books as well. I find that if I've got a lot of audiobooks on the go, I can get through things much more quickly. In terms of the films that I watched in the first quarter, again, January was the heavy hitter. I really wanted to rewatch the 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later films ahead of The Bone Temple coming to cinemas, which I did end up going to see. This slowed down massively for the rest of the quarter. In February, I only managed 4 films, and in March, only 2, one of which was a rewatch of one of my favourites, which is God's Own Country. So the only new film to me in that month was Project Hail Mary, which is one of the films I went to see in the cinema this quarter. I went twice, which was not as much as I was hoping to. I really wanted to catch Hamnet, but I just didn't get around to it, unfortunately. But I did also go and see 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, and I really enjoyed both of those films. So 2 very successful cinema trips for quarter one, and I definitely am going to be aiming to go to the cinema more in the second quarter of 2026. So for the highlights of my kind of media wrap up of quarter one, my favourite book that I read in January was We Could Be Heroes by PJ Ellis. This is an romance that focuses on a kind of up-and-coming actor who is starring as a superhero in this big kind of budget franchise. But for budgeting reasons, the filming has been shifted to Birmingham. And when this actor, Patrick, comes over to the UK, he meets Will, who is a bookseller and a drag queen. Patrick is not an out actor in Hollywood. He has been kind of informed by his agent that it would be very hard for him to break through in his career if he is an openly queer actor, and so he chooses to remain closeted, and meeting Will kind of throws all of that into a different perspective for him, and he becomes part of a community, a wider community of queer people for the first time, and that really has a big impact on him. The romance develops and the story develops from there. You also follow snippets throughout of a second timeline back in the 1940s in New York, where we follow the lavender marriage of the 2 creators of the superhero that Patrick is playing in this big budget franchise in the present day. Really, really adored this one. It spoke so much about the importance of queer community and queer visibility and the psychological harm done by being closeted and how that looks today versus how that looked back in sort of the 20th century, where you couldn't be a visibly queer person. And I found that the historical timeline didn't take anything away from the contemporary. Sometimes when I'm reading a dual timeline narrative, you find that you want to spend more time with one than the other, and it makes for a bit of a frustrating reading experience because you're just trying to get through the chapters of the timeline that you're not enjoying to get back to the timeline that you are. But this really worked, I think, because the story that follows Charles and Iris is doing so much to prop up the story that's happening in the present day. And I just thought it was really, really beautiful. I loved it, and I wish more people would pick it up because I don't really see a lot of talk about it online. So if you're looking for a really spectacularly written MM romance, We Could Be Heroes is a fantastic one. My favourite film from January was a surprising one to me. It was Queer, so the adaptation of the William S. Burroughs novel. I had reservations going into this one. I haven't read the original novel, although that will be changing because it is the April pick for the Queer Book Club that I attend, so that will be changing in the near future. But I know a little bit about William S. Burroughs and other sort of Beat Generation authors, and that entire sort of group of people was incredibly problematic, and I think Queer probably is going to be quite a problematic or difficult read at points as well, and that had always kind of put me off watching the film. But it was on Mubi and it was leaving soon, so I was like, just check it out. And do you know what? I was really pleasantly surprised by this. Visually, this movie is absolutely stunning. It felt like being in a fantasy world. Like the way it was shot was just so beautiful and dreamy to look at, and it really kind of captures this sense of nostalgia for this different time and place, but at the same time this undercurrent of loneliness and desire for connection really counteracts against this very beautiful visual that you have, and it makes for a really interesting watching experience. I thought Daniel Craig was fantastic in this one. And yeah, I had a really, really great time, and I'm really curious to now read Queer for the first time and see how much creative liberty was taken with the film, and whether the more difficult aspects of that novel were perhaps glossed over or altered in some way to make the film a little bit more updated for a modern audience. So I'm really excited to see how those two compare, and I really enjoyed this one, very, very much so. My favourite read from February, I don't have to hand because I read it on my Kobo, and that is After Hours at Dooryard Books by Cat Sebastian. This is the second Cat Sebastian I've read this year, as I did a reread of You Should Be So Lucky, which is probably still my favourite novel of hers. And the reason I didn't feature it as my favourite read for January is because I don't like to have a reread or a rewatch of something that I've already consumed as my favourite. I'd rather prioritise talking about newer media, or newer to me media. And so that's why I didn't pick You Should Be So Lucky as my favourite read of January, but that book is still an absolute 5-star favourite for me, and I will probably reread that pretty regularly forever. I think it's a wonderful portrayal of queer life at that time. And After Hours at Dooryard Books is no different. So this is also set in New York, a little bit later than the sort of mid-century New York City novels. So We Could Be So Good and You Should Be So Lucky. Both of those I think are set in the late 50s, early 60s. And After Hours at Dooryard Books is a little bit later, 1968 I think it takes place in. I still got that same sense of place from this novel. Like, something about the way Cat Sebastian writes sort of 20th century New York is just fantastic. Like, I feel like I'm there, and I've never been to New York, so she really does a fantastic job of putting you in that place and in that time period. Her approach to writing about queer life in that time is just, it's just masterful. I don't know what it is. She puts crack in those pages, I think, because I just eat it up every single time. I think it's fantastic. Her characters are always so complex and so tender and so nuanced. This one had a fantastic sort of found family setup. So this one focuses on Dooryard Books and the building that it is in, which has apartments above the bookshop, and you focus on the manager of Dooryard Books and all of the other kind of residents who've come to live in the apartments above. The owner of Dooryard Books is a woman who likes to kind of take in strays who are a bit down on their luck, And so a lot of the people that end up here are runaways or like former addicts or people who've just found themselves fallen on difficult times. And so you have these very complicated, like nuanced, interesting people with very different backgrounds, but very interesting and well-developed backstories that really come into play in how they relate to one another and the way that they end up showing up for each other. And this one is another romance, of course, because it's Cat Sebastian. It is a romance between, the names of the characters escape me. It's Nathaniel, and I can't remember the owner of, I can't remember the manager of the bookstore's name, annoyingly. It's the romance between the manager of the bookshop and Nathaniel, who is kind of the newest stray to be taken in to Dooryard Books to kind of rest and recuperate and kind of set his life on a different path. And the relationships between all of the characters was fantastic. There are two kids, like two teenagers in this, who live in one of the flats, who are just amazing. I loved every scene that they were in. I just love all of Cat Sebastian's 20th century New York books. I think they're just wonderful, and I would highly recommend checking them out if you haven't already. But I know Cat Sebastian is an incredibly popular romance author, so I'm sure she's not new to you by any means. My favourite watch of February was Pride. I was reading this for my queer book club, and I decided to watch the movie partway through. I struggled a little bit with the book because it's very much written in like an interview format. The author doesn't really add much to the actual book itself. It's very much just snippets from interviews, and the story is kind of told chronologically. For anyone who doesn't know what Pride is about, it is about lesbians and gays support the miners. When miners across the country were striking under the Thatcher-led government, and they found support and allyship in a very unlikely place in an organisation called Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. And it is about how these two very different communities came together to realise that they had more that would bring them together than kept them apart, and that they were treated very much in a similar way by the Conservative government at the time in Britain, and very much othered and made to be kind of a villain in the media. And so you saw Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, this activist organisation set up in London, who kind of partnered with a village in the Welsh Valleys who were struggling under the ongoing conditions of the strike. And Pride brings together those activists, but also miners, friends and relatives of the miners, people living in the valleys at those times, and interviews them and tells that story. And then Pride is the slightly fictionalized retelling of that very true story. I enjoyed reading the book, but as I said, the author didn't really add a lot to the way the story was being told. It was very much just interview style with people who were there. I found myself reading it and wishing I could just see these people and listen to interviews with them, and I felt like I kind of wished I was watching a documentary rather than reading this non-fiction. So partway through I decided to watch the movie to see if that amplified my reading experience of the book, and this just absolutely made me sob. It's a beautiful story and it's a really empowering story. So if anyone hasn't watched Pride, a lot of people around here have, because I do live in South Wales. It's a very well-known and celebrated part of Welsh history. But yeah, for anybody who doesn't know this story and hasn't watched the movie Pride, I would highly recommend. It's a fantastic story. It's got a great cast of actors. It's very funny, but it also shines a light on the hardships that people went through in the 80s under the Thatcher government. And yeah, it's a fantastic watch, and I was sobbing come the end like a little baby because it really got me in my feels, and it is a fantastically uplifting, like, feel-good film and a very important part of history. So for both Wales and for queer people now, I think it's a really amazing story of activism and standing up for one another. For March, far and away my favourite book was The Palace of Eros by Cara de Robertis. This is a queer, gender fluid retelling of the myth of Eros and Psyche. It's a myth I'd never heard before. I'm not really very well versed on mythology at all, and I would really like to change that this year. So watch this space for maybe some more myth-based content from me as I learn more about different mythologies and whatnot. The writing of this was just absolutely sublime. Like, I don't know if you can see, but I was dog-earing and underlining things. Like, I think the earliest I underlined anything was like page 6. Yeah, literally page 6 I was underlining and dog-earing my book, and the writing was just absolutely beautiful. It was incredibly moving. I find sometimes with myth retellings, I don't find myself very pulled into the story because I'm not familiar with the source material and the history. But for this one, it really didn't matter because the writing just pulled me in straight away. And yeah, I was completely captivated throughout this whole book. So if you're someone who enjoys a myth retelling, and a particularly queer myth retelling, so like if you liked the Song of Achilles is like the most famous example, the Palace of Eros is one I would highly recommend to you, and I'm definitely going to check out more from this author in the future. And then my favourite film from March by default had to be Project Hail Mary, because the only other film that I watched was a rewatch of God's Own Country, which is a fantastic queer film if you haven't seen it. But yes, Project Hail Mary was a really great experience. Like I said, I went to see it in the cinema. Read the book last year once I found out the adaptation was being made, because I'd heard about Project Hail Mary for years and obviously people rave about it, so I thought, why not jump on this bandwagon and see what everybody's talking about. And I did find myself enjoying the book more than I expected to, and I enjoyed the film probably about just as much. There were things that I wish that were done in the film from the book that were cut, unfortunately, and there were aspects of the source material itself that I wish were altered. It's very much like a boy novel, I find. Like, it's very hard science. Oh no, the female character and the astronaut of colour are both dead at the beginning of the book. That's unfortunate. This white guy is going to have to save the day. I also don't agree with comments that Andy Weir has made about his books being completely lacking in politics. So I think that's a bit of a silly take from the author. But I enjoyed both the book and I enjoyed the film. I went with my husband, and my husband was like cackling throughout the entire film. Like, he found it so funny, and I can understand why. Like, Ryan Gosling's performance was so charming. The team who brought Rocky to life were fantastic. Couldn't fault anything about the way they presented Rocky, and I think they did a really amazing job with some quite difficult source material. Like, a lot of this book happens in Ryland Grace's head as he's trying to figure out why he's in space, what has happened to this crew, why is he here, like, who even is he? And I think they did a really good job of capturing that. There were some aspects of the Earth-based storyline that I think would have had a little bit more impact if we'd seen them in the film. Some of the things that Strat has to do in order to kind of prevent this looming disaster, and aspects of the ending they changed a little bit or didn't quite capture in the way that I'd hoped. So the ending fell a tiny bit flat for me, and I felt that it was a little bit rushed. But again, I can kind of understand that given the runtime of the film. It was long. I can understand they had to take some choices to roll things back, but I do think the ending was maybe somewhere where they could have stretched and maybe shrunk some other parts of the film. Or just made it a 3-hour long film. I mean, people loved it, so you could have just made people sit through a 3-hour long film and they would have done it. The visuals of space were also fantastic. The set was amazing. So yeah, all around a really enjoyable cinema experience. I really loved watching Project Hail Mary. Some honourable mentions of other random bits of media that I enjoyed in the first quarter. Obviously, we have to mention Heated Rivalry. I thought the TV show adaptation was masterful. I completely understand all of the hype and all of the buzz that it has gotten. I thought the two lead actors did a fantastic job of bringing those characters to life. I honestly think, maybe this is a slightly controversial take, I think the show is a little bit better than the book, personally. I think Rachel Reed's strength as a writer comes from her character moments and her dialogue. When the characters are having moments of introspection, I feel like her writing suffers a little bit and it becomes a little bit more basic. But when she's writing dialogue and like banter between characters and scenes between characters, she does a really fantastic job there. And those are obviously the things that translate to the screen. All of my favourite moments of the books made it to the TV show, and some of the moments that I felt like we didn't need to see, or some of the moments where I felt the writing was a little bit less strong in the books, obviously didn't come to the screen. So I think the adaptation kind of took everything that was strong about the book, the best parts of the book, and brought that into the adaptation. And for me, that's why I think it's a more successful version of the story overall. Everything about the show felt very, very intentional, whereas there are parts of the book that felt a bit superfluous and like they were just there to get you a bit more horny and we could have done without. I saw a creator say that there's like 15 sex scenes in Heated Rivalry, something like that, and it is kind of unnecessary. So I think the show did a fantastic job of bringing what needed to be brought to the screen and leaving some of the more superfluous bits to the side. So highly enjoyed the show, really excited for the second season, really excited to see who gets cast in some of my favourite roles. I'm really excited to meet Troy, obviously, and Ryan Price, but also Wyatt Hayes. I really think they did a great job of casting Hayden, and so I really want to see who gets cast as like some of the other more like ally characters in the background. So yeah, very excited to see what comes next for Heated Rivalry. And another adaptation of sorts that I've really enjoyed was the National Theatre's production of The Bacchae. So again, another myth that I wasn't familiar with at all, but I really want to read The Hymn to Dionysus, which is a sort of, or is it Dionysus? I don't know. I hear people pronouncing it different ways. Dionysus? Who knows? Certainly not me. I'd heard another creator talk about the Hymns Dionysus and saying that reading the Bacchae or being familiar with Bacchae, the original play, would be helpful for understanding the context of that book. And then I saw that the National was putting on this production, and so I decided to check it out. The play is written by, the actor's name escapes me, but he plays one of the teachers in Heartstopper. I'll put his name or his picture here, but he's incredibly young, and apparently this is something like the first time the National has like picked up a debut play or something. I will check my facts and I will confirm if I'm making shit up somewhere on the screen. But he's incredibly young. I believe this is his first play and it has been picked up by the National, which is obviously an incredibly high accolade. And I thought this was fantastic. I really, really loved how queer this was, what it did in terms of bringing like a fresh and modern voice to a much, much older source material. Obviously, I haven't read the original. I'd like to, especially now that I've watched a more modern version. I feel like sometimes when I read much, much older pieces of like classical myth, some of the writing goes over my head. So to be able to read it having watched a modern adaptation, I think I would maybe get more out of that reading experience. But I really enjoyed this. I had a fantastic time. I'd highly recommend that you check it out. It's on the National Theatre's like streaming service if anyone watches plays and is interested. I definitely want to read and watch more plays throughout the rest of this year. My enjoyment of plays kind of began after I read on a whim The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde, and then saw a screening of the production of it featuring Ncuti Gatwa. I think last year I went to see that and it was just absolutely wonderful, like such a joyous viewing experience, and that made me very, very keen to watch more plays. And The Bacchae is no different. I had a great time watching it. Another honourable mention, random piece of media that I really enjoyed in Q1 of 2026. Some things I enjoyed less in Q1. My least favourite book that I picked up in January was unfortunately Going Solo by D.P. Clarence. I really enjoyed the first book in the Brent Boys series, which is The Paperboys, but something about, lots of things about Going Solo unfortunately just did not work for me at all. And most egregious probably being that I didn't want the characters to end up together. I'm trying to remember the name of the characters. I'm so bad at remembering the names of characters after the fact. I'll remember like a word choice the author made that I didn't like, but will I remember the names of their characters? Absolutely not. I'm pretty sure Tobias is one of the characters, and then is it Cole? I don't know. I'm making shit up. I don't know what that character's name is. In Going Solo, you have these two boys who met as teenagers on a kind of X Factor, Britain's Got Talent style talent reality contest. That show outed our main character Tobias and kind of made him a laughing stock after he kind of gets rejected by one of the other boys that he meets and is crushing on during the show. And then it is about them coming back together as adults after the other character, who's had a very successful like career in a boy band, goes solo, and is kind of having this like solo comeback tour. I didn't want them to end up together. The character who is like in the boy band, whose name I cannot remember, I did not like him. I thought he was an asshole. He was such a dick to Tobias the whole time. He had no respect for Tobias's boundaries, and he kept pushing and pushing and pushing at Tobias because he wanted a second chance and for them to be able to like get it together again. And he had no care in the world for whether Tobias wanted that at all. Like, he did not give a fuck. He was like, I'm better now. I've been to rehab and I've done soul searching, so I want us to get back together, and so you must want that as well. And again, he didn't care what Tobias had been through. The fact that he'd been like a national laughing stock and he'd gone completely viral as a 16-year-old and had been ridiculed and mocked relentlessly all over the internet. And Tobias is now a media figure as well. He's the host of a radio show. Being thrust back into the limelight with this boy band dude, like, is really difficult for him. And, like, his family gets targeted and stuff like that. And the other guy just doesn't give a fuck about any of that because he just wants to get back together. And so I really didn't want them to end up together. I didn't like them together at all. I found some of the writing around, like, female fandom to be quite bordering on misogynistic. I'm not trying to make any claims that the author is misogynistic. I wouldn't say that at all. But some of the ways that he chose to talk about female fans in this book strayed into the realm of like vaguely misogynistic caricature, and I didn't like that at all. So the writing didn't work for me, the characterization didn't work for me, the romance didn't work for me. I think if you're writing a romance and I actively don't want your two main characters to get together, then that's irredeemable. I'm not gonna enjoy it after that, even if it's the most beautiful writing, you know, the most fantastic cast of characters, an amazing setting. If I don't want your two main characters to get together, then, you know, we are not going to be compatible, me and your book. And that was unfortunate because like I said, I did really enjoy the first book in that series. But I'm still really excited to read the third installment, Much Obliged, because it's on a reality TV show setting, baby, and I just eat that up every time. I don't know why. I thought I would like Going Solo because it kind of had that element of it as well. You have flashbacks to when these two kids were on this TV show, but because it was like X Factor style and it wasn't like a reality sort of dating show, it didn't work for me as much. But yeah, I feel like Much Obliged is going to be a bit more up my street. I also think one of the male leads in that one is bisexual, and I always love reading about a bisexual male main character. So still very much excited for Much Obliged and will carry on reading the author's work, but Going Solo for me was just, it wasn't a winner, unfortunately, but still would highly recommend The Paperboys. That one was very charming and sweet and lovely. The low point of my movie experiences in January was by far The Long Walk, which is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel. This is the worst film I've seen all year. Just trash. I hated every second of this. This is a kind of dystopia set in this post-war America where unemployment and poverty is really high. And so this kind of like reality competition show is created to kind of, I don't know, like the central premise of the film is stupid. So the premise of this show is any boy who's like over the age of 16 or whatever can enroll, and it's completely voluntary. First of all, so like nobody has to sign up to this whatsoever. It's not like a Hunger Games scenario where you have no choice. It's completely voluntary. But after the age of 16 or 18 or however old it is, all men can sign up to take part in the Long Walk. And you basically have like, I don't know, 50 odd guys, and they just have to walk. And you walk and you walk and you walk. And if you slow your pace too much, or you stop for more than like 10 seconds, you get killed, you get shot. And it's until you just walk until there's only one dude left, and that dude wins a bunch of money. But like I just don't feel like, first of all, the story did a good enough job of making me understand why that's a good enough incentive that anyone would voluntarily put themselves forward for this. I don't feel we did enough work to establish why society is in such a poor state that would be enticing for people to do. This is all televised, so everyone realizes how horrifying it is. And it's also not interesting TV watching. You're literally just watching these dudes walk down a road until they all start to bleed and slow down, have to pull their pants down to take a shit in the middle of the road. This film made me watch actual shit come out of a boy's asshole, and it did not do anything to make it worthwhile that I had to sit through that. So I'm very angry about this film. I feel like the actors tried their best, but they were given really stilted, overly sentimental bullshit dialogue, and then were just made to like swear and like scream fuck a bunch of times really emotionally, and as if that's enough to get me as a viewer to feel their like emotional pain. It just felt like I was watching a bunch of teenage boys being really dramatic, even though the stakes are like incredibly high and I'm watching them die. I didn't feel it. They all suddenly have this like deep camaraderie with one another, even though they're all literally battling it out and they all know that only one of them is going to live. But they're all like buddy like straight away. I don't know what it was critiquing. I don't think it knows what it was critiquing. There's this really simplified villain character, and that always grinds my gears. If you've got a really oversimplified villain character who's evil because they're evil, then I think you're a lazy writer. I think that's just such an oversimplification of people doing arguably evil deeds. Is it like, oh, they did this evil thing because they're evil? And yeah, I just didn't like anything. There was no redeeming quality of this film whatsoever. It didn't look good, it didn't sound good, the dialogue wasn't good. Did I mention I had to watch shit come out of a butt? Nothing about this film was good. So I didn't like it at all. I normally don't like to hate on something quite so drastically, but like The Long Walk really pissed me off. And I watched this in January and I'm still pissed off about it. So you know I really didn't get on with this film. Moving on to a piece of content that is not arguably bad, it's just very average. And that is my least favourite read of February, which was Morbidly Yours by Ivy Fairbanks. This one is more disappointing than it is out and out bad. It's fine. It's a perfectly fine romance. I just really wanted to love it because I really enjoy the concept of this. You have this woman who is widowed in her 20s. She decides to kind of uproot her life and have a fresh start, and she moves to Galway, Ireland, and she meets this guy who is a funeral director. He runs a funeral home, and he's kind of the socially awkward guy. He is demisexual, and I always enjoy seeing that representation, especially in a male character, because I think media would have you believe that men are just like these inherently sexual beings who think about sex and are driven by sex constantly. And I like stories that turn that on its head and show that that isn't the case, and it's an oversimplification of how men work. I really wanted to like this one because it sounded like it was going to be really up my street, and it was just fine. Didn't fall in love with the writing. Found some of the character moments to be a bit awkward and not very convincing. It was just, at times it was a little bit silly. I didn't dislike it by any means, but it was just nothing to write home about, you know? And I've read so much romance already in 2026 that I've seen some real high highs. So the bar is up here now, and Morbidly Yours was like down here somewhere. Would still recommend reading it if that premise intrigues you. It's not bad. Like I said, it's not bad. It's just fine. It's okay. It was just okay. And I wanted it to be more than okay, and it wasn't. That's all. I didn't have any films that I disliked in February. Every film that I watched in February, I rated a 4-star, I believe. So, yeah, a really decent watching month, even though I didn't watch anywhere near as much as I did in January. I don't have any more movies to rant about. So, yeah, this was a good month of watching. Enjoyed everything I watched, would recommend everything that I watched. So, happy days there. For March, my least favourite book was A River of Golden Bones by A.K. Mulford. This is one that I read for the Trans Rights Readathon, and unfortunately I just didn't get on with it. It's a wolf shifter romantasy focusing on these two twins whose parents are killed when they were born, and they've been in hiding ever since, and it is kind of their journey to save their kingdom from this evil sorceress that killed their parents. Very simplistically, that's what the plot is about. We have this dynamic that could have been really interesting to learn about if more was kind of made of it, where humans are like the majority of the citizens of this world made up of 4 kingdoms, and wolves rule it, and wolf society is very hierarchical and very patriarchal, whereas human society is a lot more fluid, particularly around gender. One of the things I did enjoy about this was the exploration of the main character's gender identity and the journey that she goes on to discover who she is. But other than that, there wasn't a lot that I really enjoyed about it. I really didn't like the writing style. If I ever read a book again where the main character's eyes are described as storming over and over and over again, I'm DNFing the book. I can't do it again. Like, every 5 pages it felt like this guy's eyes were storming, and I was like, oh, that doesn't even make any sense. The romance didn't interest me. It's a fated mate situation, which I'd never read before, but yeah, it's a trope that I don't think is really going to work for me, unfortunately. I wouldn't say no to reading a fated mates book in future if I come across one that sounds particularly up my street in other ways, but given that I'm a yearner, and I want there to be tension, I want there to be friction between the characters, like before they kind of get it together and realise that they're down bad. Like, fated mates just feels too easy to me. I feel like you got to work for it, you know. I want you to really make me feel like all this is paid off by the end, and fated mates just doesn't feel like that. I found some of the storytelling aspects to be quite lazy. Again, this is one where the villain is just evil because she's evil. I think the author did do some kind of work to try and humanize her in some ways and make her seem kind of flawed and nuanced and complex, but it just felt very flat, because there was really one instance of that happening, and the rest of the time it was just like, no, this person is evil and she does all these things because she's evil. So that obviously annoys me, as we discussed before. If you're really into werewolves, if you're really into shifter stuff, if you love fated mates and you want all of that in a fantasy setting, then like, this is going to be the book for you. But unfortunately, it just wasn't the book for me. But once again, in March, enjoyed everything that I watched. We have no low points to discuss for March. March was a very good watching month, even though I only watched 2 things, but they were 2 very good things, at least. That's kind of where I'm at in terms of my reading and my movie watching. I definitely want to prioritise watching more films again in April, May, June. I feel like I started off really strong watching a lot of films at the beginning of the year, and that kind of fell off a cliff in the later months. So I want to bring that back up, watch some more movies and enjoy doing that. In terms of my reading, I read one non-fiction, which is diabolical. And I think I only read that because it was my book club pick. And so if that hadn't been the case, I may have ended up reading no non-fiction. And I've also read no poetry and I've read no plays. So I really want to kind of diversify the types of things that I'm reading. I've read a lot of fantasy, I've read a lot of romance, and that's great. Like, I love those genres, but I definitely want to feel like my reading feels more broad throughout the rest of the year. So hopefully I'm going to be able to fit in some other formats and types of reading as we go forward into quarter 2. In terms of my book buying, you'll be pleased to know that I have been sticking to my no chain bookshops rule. I've kept a list of everything that I've bought. So for January, physical books, I bought 4. Only one of those was new. I bought Pride because it was the Queer Book Club pick for the following month. And I bought that from a lovely stall called Novella, and that is an initiative run by friends of mine. They are trying to raise the funds to set up a kind of pop-up community space, like queer bookshop, cafe and community space in Swansea in the near future. And so they're doing lots of pop-up stalls and selling books at those stalls to try and raise the funds to make that happen. So I bought Pride through them, and the other 3 books I picked up were all secondhand, either in like the little Tesco book bin where they raise money for charity, or in my local Oxfam bookstore. Kobo, I went a little bit more mad, but I tend to reserve my buying on Kobo for things that are on sale, so I don't tend to spend as much money as I would be if I was buying all like new paperbacks or hardback books. And so in March I acquired 10 books. 2 of those were free. Every now and again authors can decide to offer a book for free on ebook platforms, I guess. So 2 of the books I acquired for free. The other 8 I purchased through the Kobo store. In February, I bought no books. No physical books, no digital books. Didn't buy anything. I was really good in February, really, really good. And then that all kind of went out the window in March. In March, I bought 7 books, and I also received a book as a gift that I know was secondhand. My husband treated me while we were out and about. Out of the 7 that I bought, 4 were new, but I bought them from independent bookstores while I was away in Manchester. I went to the House of Books and Friends and Social Refuge, which is a really lovely queer community space, cafe and bookshop that I make an effort to go to every time I'm in Manchester because I love it with my whole heart. So I bought 2 books in there and then 2 books in the House of Books and Friends, and the other books I bought secondhand. Again, a bit mad on Kobo buying in March. I bought another 8 books on Kobo, but again, all would have been discounted. I tend to get sucked in when a book is like 99p. So a lot of the time I may have bought 7 or 8 books on Kobo, but it's probably cost me £10 or less. And a few of the books I purchased I've already read because like I said, I was on a big romance kick and finding lots of new romance authors to read. And a few of those are my most anticipated releases for 2026. So I may do a little vlog over the next couple of months reading some of the books that I featured in my anticipated reads of 2026 video, so we can see if they live up to my self-imposed hype or not. I have been in a Waterstones a couple of times, but always with company, and I've not bought anything in there. I have bought 1 ticket to an event at Waterstones, so I've spent £5. £5 have gone from my bank account to Waterstones in this quarter, and that was for an online talk between T. Kingfisher and KJ Charles, and how could I say no to that? That's a dream talk, and it was a fantastic time. T. Kingfisher talked about Wolfworm, they talked about Daggerbound. I was really pleased that KJ Charles brought up some of the other things that T. Kingfisher is working on as well, and so we found out a little bit about the plans for the Saint of Steel series, as well as the next book to come after Daggerbound, as well as obviously they're kind of just the way that she goes about writing her book, some funny stories from her days as an author, and it was just a really cozy and delightful little talk, and I got to tune in from the comfort of my own home, which was really nice because I was sick. So if it had been in person, I wouldn't have been able to attend. So I was really glad that that was an online one and I was able to enjoy it, even though I was sniffling and coughing like crazy and wrapped up in many blankets. So there you have it. That is a summary of all the media that I've been consuming in Q1 of this year and all of the books that I've bought. Really pleased that I've been able to stick to my plan of buying only books from non-chain sources. I will be sticking to that for the rest of the year. I'm feeling very determined to make sure that that happens, and I've also been feeling really inspired to use my library a lot more. There's a lovely new library space in the middle of Swansea as well, which makes it even more easy and delightful to access the library. So yeah, I'm really not feeling like I'm missing out. That's all going really well. So that's it from me for today. I would love to hear what you've been reading and watching and what you've been up to in the first quarter of 2026. If you've read anything that you've particularly loved in the last 3 months, let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your recommendations. Thank you as always for watching this video. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And of course, stay safe and happy reading.